My name is Ben Cantrell, and I'm a member of the Historic Committee of the NBA. Today I'm honored to interview a lady known as Rose Cantrell, who happens to be my wife and a longtime member of the bar in Davidson County. This interview is her oral history and is taken for the oral history program of the bar, and this date is March the 12th, 2021. Before I start, I want you to know that this interview is being taken during the pandemic, which is now nearly a year old in this country. So we are recording from our home, and the interview is being recorded by our own professional videographer, our daughter Julie. So Rose, why don't you start at the beginning by telling us about your background, where you're from and where you grew up and who your parents were and where you went to school.
It's been so long ago, Ben, I'll do my best. I can barely remember my birthday, but I was born on July 29th, 1944 on Signal Mountain in close by to Chattanooga and Hamilton County. And my mother and dad were Virginia and St. John Park. And to give a little bit about their history, my mother, I'll start with Mom, she was a child prodigy in the piano, and I think intended to eventually teach music. But she attended a prominent music school in Chattanooga, the Shattuck Conservatory of Music, and was very gifted playing the piano. In fact, after her graduation in her later teens, she gave performances on the piano on WDOD radio in Chattanooga. So she was very talented, and I think that she was planning a career in music and in teaching it, piano specifically. Now, my dad had different ideas, of course, as we will soon know. But to give a little bit of background about my dad, he and his family were survivors of the Depression. Their dad, unfortunately, left them in the Depression, and my dad and his older brother, my Uncle Bob, had to quit high school to help with the family. And they applied to the Civilian Conservation Corps and were assigned to Hickman County, just west of Nashville, and Centerville was the county seat. That's where they went. And they worked very hard, but they found time to enjoy themselves. And I just wanted to share a little anecdote about that time, because it was near and dear to Dad's heart. And that is, in performing in the little theater of that community, they met a really personality plus young lady named Ophelia Colley. And they had a great time with her, the two of them, in these little theater plays. And of course later, Ophelia Colley went to the big stage, the Opry stage, and took on the name of Minnie Pearl. Now my dad loved Minnie Pearl and remained friends with her for the rest of his life, he and my Uncle Bob.
Yes, I remember talking to your dad and to Minnie Pearl herself to see if they remembered that incident in their lives, and they both remembered it very fondly. I guess the Depression was such a horrible time that anybody that had fun was bound to remember it.
Yeah. Well, I know that they certainly did, but we always cherish that story because we all love Minnie Pearl. But anyway, once they got out of all of that, and Dad and Mother married, he got into the insurance business, started selling insurance, and did quite well in that. He was a good salesman. And as I say, Mother didn't get to return to her music career because after they got married, they started having a family. And I happened to be one of 12 children. I'm fourth from the top. And so that kind of defined us all, growing up in a family of 12 children.
Can you name all of your siblings?
Well, I used to be able to name them. Ben, I didn't know you were going to call me to do that. I'll do my best. My oldest sister is Mary, who was our mentor. And I don't know what we would have done without Mary. She was a mentor to all of us and tried her best to get us to do the right thing. And sometimes we did. But Mary, Patrick, Kathy, me, Mike, Chris, Ed, Paul, Tom, Margaret, Andy, and Teresa. Our baby was Teresa Ann. And my mother had all of us, the 12 of us, in 16 years. So you can imagine we were all very close. Some of us are even less than a year apart. And there was only 2 of us that were born 2 years from the one over them. So we were a very close family, and really worked hard to help Mother and then also to create problems for her as well along the way, and Dad.
But you didn't grow up on Signal Mountain, did you?
No, when I was 5 years old, Mother had 4 more little babies in the house. And so we had to move because the only school available to us was in downtown Chattanooga, Notre Dame High School, or Notre Dame Elementary School, actually. It's also a high school. So we had to move because you went by bus. We needed something closer to us, and we moved to the OLPH, Our Lady of Perpetual Help parish, and also it had both the church and school. And we moved right down the hill. We just walked every day to school. So we all, and I, attended and graduated from OLPH. And then after that, we went back downtown because Notre Dame High School was the only Catholic high school in Chattanooga at that time. I don't know if it's changed or not, but it was that way when I was there. So everybody had to go. If you were Catholic, you went to Notre Dame High School downtown. And I graduated from Notre Dame in 1962.
Okay, let me stop you right there. I want to ask you about a subsequent career that your mother had after she raised all those 12 children and they got away from home.
Yeah, incredible. My mother decided she wanted to go to college. So after we were all gone, that's just exactly what she did. And it was a surprise to all of us. We didn't know she intended to ever go to college. But she went for 4 years and obtained her registered nursing degree. And at that time, she was 58 years old. We all were so thrilled for her, and even though we were all in different parts of this country at that time, and with children of our own, some of us, we decided to throw her a big party at the Reed House in celebration of her incredible accomplishment. We're very proud of her. I just so happen to have a picture right here of all of us at that occasion. Can you see it, Julie? Got it? I think she's got it. But anyway, this was all of us at her party, and of course Mother and Daddy are sitting right there in the middle, looking like they're having a great time. It was really a marvelous celebration.
And did your mom actually work as a nurse?
First, I'll just say I've spared everybody having to go through the 12 of us at various stages in our childhood because we were always having our picture taken for Brainerd or for department stores selling shoes and what have you. This was one time when we really, truly enjoyed being together. We didn't like our picture taken that much.
But she did work as a nurse.
She did. She absolutely did. She worked well into her 70s. She was hired first by Memorial Hospital, and where she actually attended to patients. Then after that, when she got a little bit older, she joined Hamilton County Nursing Home staff, where she took care of patients at that time and also made home visits as well. So she was quite busy during that time. We were so proud of her.
Okay, while we're paused too, I want to say that I've always been impressed by the fact that 5 of your 7 brothers served in the military.
That's true. That's absolutely true. 5 of my brothers, and it was 3 of them were assigned to Vietnam, and boots on the ground. They saw active duty in Vietnam. My 3rd brother, my oldest brother, Patrick Park, he was served as a Navy seaman, and he was actually on the USS Maddox during the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And he was the gunner that actually was told to open fire on a ship believed to be an enemy ship coming at the USS Maddox. Just in the nick of time, he recognized that this was not an enemy ship, but in fact an American ship, and he did not open fire. And so that was the Turner Joy, I think it was, Ben. So he saved the day on that one. And he was later interviewed by Maury Safer, who was the journalist who covered the Vietnam War. Later, he headed up 60 Minutes, and at that time he interviewed my brother about his role in the Gulf of Tonkin incident and on the USS Maddox.
Yes, I remember seeing that episode where Pat was interviewed about what happened that night. Okay, so you graduated from high school in 1962. Where did you go to college?
I went to college at the University of Chattanooga, as it was then known, later to be known as the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I majored in history. I intended to teach history. That was my plan. But after 3 years of being at the University of Chattanooga, I made a decision, a life-changing decision, I may say, to transfer to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Life-changing because, of course, that is where you and I met.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, we met and started dating, and you were in your last year of law school, and I was in my last year, of course, in undergrad. So we hit it off and decided to get married the next year, and so I thought it was time to take you to meet the folks, and that's what we did. And anyway, you came to my house and met my mother and daddy. I thought it was going well, actually, and going real well. They seemed to receive you very well, and you seemed to get along with them just fine. So I was very relieved at that. And so you and I returned back to Knoxville. And 2 days after I got back, I got a letter from my mother. You remember me telling you about this, Ben. I got a letter from my mother in which she said you were a lovely man in every way. They liked you very much. But she thought about it and she said, I don't want you to get married to him because, number one, he's not a Catholic, and number two, he's not a Democrat. And I think I may have mentioned that they were good Catholics and good Democrats. already here. If I haven't, that's what they were. And especially my mother. She was a devout Catholic. And so that crushed me, absolutely crushed me. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And then the next day, one day after Mother's letter, I got a letter from my father. And I wasn't used to taking my father's advice too often, but this was an occasion where I did, because he started that letter off with these words: "Please disregard your mother's letter in its entirety." And so I was more than glad to do that. Eventually we did marry, and we moved here to Nashville, where you had secured a job with a law firm here. And then we welcomed our little girls into our family. And during this time, I had been talking with my sister Mary about possibly going to law school. And we eventually did that. We enrolled at the Nashville School of Law in 1971, and we graduated in 1975. And just a little note here, we graduated in a class of 75 people. Only 8 of them were women. And I'm so thankful that we're doing so much better today. So after I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a position as law clerk to Judge Ruth Kennard and Judge Paul Jennings, the bankruptcy judges. That was a wonderful experience, and I will always appreciate my time with those 2 judges. They were fabulous to work with. Following that, in 1976, after my clerkship ended, I joined Metro Legal Department. Peter Curry was the director of law at that time, and that was just, he was a great leader. It was fun to work with Peter. I'll always be grateful to him for his leadership.
Okay, is there one particular case that you remember during your days at Metro Legal?
Well, there is. There is a case that I specifically remember. It was the prison riot case of 1975, as it had become known in the legal department. That's how we referred to it. Another way to call it is the pork chop riot. This occurred at the state prison. It all started when the kitchen ran out of the featured entree, which was pork chops. And so they started serving half of the line bologna.
Was that at the main prison here?
That was at the main prison off Centennial Boulevard, not far from here. And as you can imagine, Ben, the prisoners didn't take too well to that. And a scuffle ensued, which became a full-fledged riot involving 350 inmates out there in the prison yard. Metro got involved when the state called us and to activate the canine unit to get the prisoners back into their cells and assist in quelling this riot. The riot was quelled, but eventually, but the prisoners brought a suit alleging excessive force against both the state guards and the canine unit of the Metro Police Force. This case started off with a small stack of files, which eventually ended up in a room dedicated to just that case, where it housed many stacks of files. What I really learned so much from handling this case, Ben, was getting to know so many lawyers. Initially, Assistant Attorney General Joe Haynes handled the case for the state, but after many other parties were brought into it from the state, it was being handled by bunches of attorneys all over Nashville. Very good leading attorneys. I specifically remember Aubrey Harwell, Matt Sweeney, Larry Woods. This was an opportunity for me to learn from these really good lawyers, and I did. And I will always appreciate that.
I think the case was filed in the federal court, and Judge Clear Morton had it. Is that correct?
That is correct. It also had Judge Clear Morton, who was a legend already. We'd all heard of Judge Clear Morton. And he took control of this case right from the outset and said, lawyers, you get this case settled. And so that's what we were working toward accomplishing. Eventually the case was settled. Judge Morton retired and Judge Wiseman took it over. And Metro came off with a very good settlement, which certainly pleased the council and pleased me.
How long did the case go on?
It went on for about 3 more years. I spent, I guess I worked on this case for most of the time that I was at the legal department.
Okay, let's move up to the year 1980.
Okay.
You left the legal department that year and went into private practice. Tell us briefly about that.
Well, Jane Buffalo had approached me. Jane was a year ahead of me in law school, and so Mary and I got to know Jane at that time. And so she approached me about joining her in sharing space to practice law. And so I did that. And we opened up shop in I think it was, what was that? It was your building too.
It was the J.C. Bradford building.
The J.C. Bradford building.
Which is now the hotel at the corner of 4th and Church.
Absolutely. But anyway, we started, we got an office there and shared the space and the cost of that time. So I practice entirely civil law, and I got on the assignment board, for lack of a better way of describing it, of the probate court and also legal services, and I got some great cases in that way. I also handled domestic relations cases. I never handled that. All these cases were different from what I'd done in Metro Legal, so it was a real opportunity to learn the general civil practice. The main thing that I did, though, was I got appointed to the panel of trustees in bankruptcy, and so that's what I did. I was a trustee in bankruptcy, and was that ever a different thing? I clerked in bankruptcy court, but I didn't have an idea in the world what a trustee in bankruptcy was doing. So that was a real learning experience. In fact, that whole time was a learning experience. I did that for about 2 years, and then another opportunity came along.
Well, before we get to that, there are 2 events that happened in the years 1980, 81, up to 82 that I think are important.
Okay.
So the first one was the organization of the Lawyers Association for Women. So
yes, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
Well, in the years between 1975, when I graduated, and 1981, when we organized the Lawyers Association for Women, each year brought more and more women practicing in Nashville. And more women were graduating from Vanderbilt, UT, and the Nashville School of Law. Each year brought a few more. So we were getting to be a recognizable group and not so scattered. And we decided it was time to form an organization of women lawyers to better support each other in the practice of law and in getting leadership positions on boards and getting on boards of directors, primarily of the MBA and the TBA, and also to get women on the bench, because in 1981 there was still no women who had ever served as a trial judge in Davidson County. And so those were our goals, and we organized the Lawyers Association for Women, Marion Griffith chapter. The first meeting was in 1981, in February of that year. Our first president was the always wonderful Claudia Bonneman. So great first president for this organization.
So were you a founding member of that organization?
I was a founding member, but the true leaders of getting it together were wonderful group of women. I remember specifically Margaret Bim, who has since gone on to accomplish so much for women. Margaret Bim and of course Sissy Daughtry, Rose Palermo, and Aleda Trauger. I'll forget them, so I won't go any further unless you could remind me of some of them.
Well, probably Marietta Shipley, because
and
she and
Marietta,
Margaret
of course,
were
and
partners.
Barbara Haynes. Both Marietta and Barbara were right behind me in school. They were very active in this organization effort, and I applaud all those women for getting out there and doing a fine job of getting us organized and on the map.
So in 1981, you were also elected to the bar, to the board of directors of the Nashville Bar Association. So tell us about that.
Well, yes, I was extremely honored to be elected to the board of directors of the Nashville Bar Association. And I remember that my first president was Bob Walker, and then it was a 3-year term. So I've served under Bob Walker and Jack Robinson and Ed Yarborough in my last year. My last year, I was honored again by being elected the second vice president, and to Joe Haynes' first vice president, and then of course Ed was the president.
So let's fast forward to 1982. There was a significant event in your career, so you tell us about that.
Yes, it was a life-changing time for me, for my career. But let me start by saying that 1982 was a election year in Davidson County, local elections. And that included judges, as well as DAs and other local positions. And Judge Steve North was the judge of the Fifth Circuit Court in Davidson County. And he had decided to run for DA, District Attorney General. And he resigned to make that race 6 months before the end of his term. And Governor Alexander appointed me to take his place on the court to fill out that term. So that made me the first woman judge to serve on the trial court in Davidson County, which was a huge honor for me. And I will always be grateful to Governor Alexander for giving me that opportunity and having the trust in me to do a good job. So I was sworn in on March 1st. And let me just say right here that I think the organization of Lawyers Association for Women had a lot to do with that. In that 1 year, it was almost a year to the day, that law had been up and running, there was so much that had been done already. We had become a name and a group to be contended with, and I just think it had a lot to do with that appointment. And I thank them all for it.
And I will interject here and say that 2 women were actually elected to judgeships in the August election. Judge Muriel Robinson became the judge of the Fourth Circuit Court, and Barbara Haynes became a General Sessions judge.
Absolutely.
So women were beginning to be recognized.
seen and heard. So in any event, I took the oath of office on March 1st, 1982, and that was on a Thursday. And the next day, Friday, was motion day. And I remember going up those steps and knees knocking just a little bit. The room was full of attorneys, mostly male. I don't remember any women attorneys there, actually. It was a sea of men, because the docket had gotten backed up because Judge North had resigned a month earlier. So during that time, the docket had grown. And they looked at me like they were as worried as I was looking at them. And it's just the first time that they had ever had to argue a motion to a woman judge. And we got through it, all of us together, and but not without a few bumps in the road, like His Honor. I heard that a number of times that morning, and but we got through it, and they were very respectful. Most all of them, I guess.
Well, the court also had some criminal jurisdiction, did it not?
It did. It absolutely did. That was another big part of this particular judgeship, because Judge North had volunteered to help out the criminal docket by taking on the DUI cases. And he had done that for a number of years, I think, before that. But again, that docket was also backed up, and so we had to go to Saturdays to listen to that docket. And but this was new to me, having a criminal docket for sure, because I didn't practice any criminal law at any time before that. So I had to brush up on some criminal law for sure before I held that first docket. But again, we got through that, and then the third thing I had to do was to form an election crew and get an election group together to help me run this election that I was going to be facing.
So you decided to run.
I decided to run, and I was going to give it all my effort that I could. So my election committee was primarily consisted, well, I'm not sure it was primary, but it sure was a big part of it. That was my family, my Democrat family. And here I was running as a Republican because I had been appointed by Governor Alexander. I thought I should run as a Republican, and that's what I did. And it was going to be an uphill battle because I was facing Walter Kurtz, the Honorable Walter Kurtz, who was a highly respected member of the bar. He had made quite a name for himself already. And I knew that was going to be a hard challenge.
What had Judge Kurtz been doing before he ran for this office?
Well, at the time he was running, and what he had been doing was he had been elected the public defender. So he had already faced an election and won, and was a strong candidate. He had become well known as being the director of legal services already, and he did that before he became public defender. In fact, he hired my sister Mary at one point to join his office, which she did. And I remember my two little girls and me also working for him in his election to the public defender office. So I knew Walter Kurtz, and I knew he was going to be a big challenge for me.
Okay, so you started to tell us about your family being part of your committee.
Again, I have to take my hat off and thank my family. We always showed up for each other, and I asked for their help, and they gave it to me. My sisters were involved, my brothers were involved, and my father was involved. Despite him being a big Democrat, he came up here and helped his daughter get elected to the post. and he was the star of my yard sign committee, Ben. I'm sure you remember. He enlisted the help of Margaret, my sister, my younger sister, and my sister Kathy. And they were my dad got permission to put a yard sign for me in yards, and he got a lot of, he was a great salesman. I've told you that before, and he did a great job here. And so they put the yard signs in once he got permission. They were a very effective team. And so we did our best and worked very hard at it, and at the same time I had to be a judge. So this was a busy year for me, and very busy time. But in the end, I didn't win that election. Walter won that election and went on to have a very distinguished career as the judge at the Fifth Circuit Court.
Okay, on September the 1st, 1982, you were unemployed. Is that correct?
Well, how indelicate, Ben, but in fact you're correct. I was unemployed, and but serving in this judgeship opened doors, which was part of my plan, because I knew I was in an uphill battle trying to win as a Republican in a Democratic county. And so doors did get open, and I joined almost immediately the law firm of Spade and Parker. And that was Bob Parker and Richard Spade, who had been in the Carpenter Woods firm and decided to go out and establish their own firm. And they had a nice list of clients, primarily an insurance defense firm, a civil litigation firm, and I was excited and ready to go. In addition to Richard and Bob, Kathy Paget and Tom Lawrence, two wonderful attorneys, were already there. And eventually, before the year was up, George Dean was invited to join as well. So off we went. And really, it was just a great practice and very enjoyable. And we, as I said, it was an insurance defense firm. We had representative clients would be Chubb Insurance, Fireman's Fund Insurance, SVMIC, which was State Volunteer Mutual Insurance Company, which insured the doctors in the state. And also Bob represented Harpeth Valley and utility district. And I also did some bankruptcy work as well.
But not all your work was insurance defense. You had other clients besides insurance companies, didn't you? Yes,
I represented Opryland, and eventually we started representing the Predators in their litigation work. All of that was very exciting. The Opryland, I was assigned primarily to Opryland. I also did some bankruptcy, as I said, and then I did some work for the Predators, all of which was good work, interesting work, and I enjoyed it very much. In my later years of my law practice, I really got into the medical malpractice defense work, and I thoroughly enjoyed the challenge of that. We litigated our cases. We weren't settling them at mediation then. We were taking them to court. Some were settled, but a lot of them did go to court, and those were exhilarating experiences for me personally. And George and I worked on, we were paired up, and Bob and Tom were paired up. Richard had resigned from the firm, and after that we became Parker, Lawrence, Cantrell, and Dean. We were partners, and that was truly exciting to be a partner in this good law firm.
Okay, now that you've kind of described what your general practice was, are there any cases that you particularly remember that were really challenging?
We had some great cases, and especially in the medical malpractice field, Ben. all of those presented their own unique challenges and strategies, but there was one that really stood out above the others, and that's the one I'm recalling now. It involved a young school teacher. She was in her mid-30s, I believe, in Clarksville, and a popular teacher and young lady. She started having abdominal pain complaints. They were non-specific, as I recall, but she came to see my client because he was a gastroenterologist who had seen her before, and so he decided to do a colonoscopy on her to see if he could find a reason for her complaints. The colonoscopy was performed. It was unremarkable. The bowel was clear, and she was released to go home to follow up as necessary. She continued to have abdominal complaints, but she went to see a general surgeon in Clarksville, and he conducted a exploratory operation on her, following which she developed sepsis and tragically died. So the family brought a wrongful death lawsuit against my client, and the issue in the case was that on autopsy they had found that her colon had a perforation in it. So it pointed to my client's colonoscopy.
Well, that does seem like a really uphill case. That
Definitely
she
was.
died of sepsis, and they found a tear, and he had performed a colonoscopy.
That was exactly the case. I mean, it looked like the logical one, and the reason for her death was likely his procedure. So anyway, at his deposition, which was videotaped, he testified that he did not perforate her bowel during the procedure. And so a bright line had been established at that time, and that was, where did this tear in the colon come from? And if he was the obvious one, as he was the one that conducted the colonoscopy, but his position was, I didn't do it. I didn't put the perforation in her colon. So our challenge was to explain how his colonoscopy was not related directly to this issue. And so we engaged a pathologist at Vanderbilt who, upon looking at the various slides from the pathology,
The
autopsy, yes, that she could say that the tear that she was examining did not occur during the patient's life, that she was already dead when the perforation was there.
So that means it would have been done during the autopsy. Is that correct?
That was what she was saying. That the perforation occurred during the autopsy after she had died, of course.
Well,
and could not have been done during her life.
So you had to try this case. Is that correct?
And the reason, let me just say this, the reason is that she examined the slides and could find no blood around the perforation, which would have definitely been there, signs of bleeding, had it been done during the colonoscopy, because she would have been alive, of course, but there was none. So this case went to court, and to better enable this witness to present the facts, these facts, we realized that we were going to have to get her out of the stand. She didn't project as well from the stand. We knew she wasn't. So, but she projected very well when that microphone was in front of her, and she's looking at the microscope. She was looking through her microscope and telling us what she was seeing. She was very persuasive under those circumstances, and so we got a microscope and brought it into court. And this was Judge Brothers' court, which was the high-tech court at that time. And we had the screen, and we could put the microscope there in front of the jury and bring her off the stand and let her testify and teach the jury. And I'll say this about a jury: they love to be taught about medical malpractice. In fact, juries like to understand what they are hearing. But in medical matters, they really wanted to be taught because they didn't know. And she was in a teaching moment there in front of them with the microscope and the slides up on behind her on the screen. And she was a powerful witness. And so her ultimate opinion was that this perforation showing on the slides did not occur, as I've mentioned before, when she was alive. Whatever happened during the autopsy after she had died. And the jury brought back a verdict that there was no probable cause in this case because of her testimony that the patient had already died when the perforation occurred. So we won the case, and it was a hard-fought case. We had a very capable attorney on the other side, been trained actually himself in pathology. But every time he tried to assail her on cross-examination, she just got stronger. She knew what she was talking about, and the jury knew that she knew what she was talking about. So that was a case that I will never forget.
Well, it does sound like you've had some very interesting cases in your long career with that law firm. I want to go back, though, and mention the fact that you served a year as the president of LAW while you were practicing with that firm. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. I was asked to serve as president for the 95-96 term, and I was very honored to do so.
Well, is there something specific that happened that year that you'd like to mention?
Yes, there was something specific. We established the first ever minority outreach committee. I had two great people working on that committee. Kitty Calhoun and Marissa Campbell worked very diligently to get it set up and to get it established. I was very proud of them and proud that that happened during my term.
Okay, so you practiced with that firm from 1982 until 2010,
Yes.
when you finally retired. What have you done since your retirement?
Well, I got interested in community service work. I really hadn't had much time for community service work during my active practice. And so I was appointed by Mayor Carl Dean to the Metro Historic Zoning Commission. And I remained in that position for 4 years. And that I learned so much about the history of Nashville. It was just a very valuable experience that I will always cherish.
Okay, so since 2010 up to now, we're both retired.
Yes, we are. Finally, you retired, Ben. You took a little longer than I did. But we've retired, and we have done some traveling. We wanted to do some traveling, and we did. So we took a Baltic tour, Baltic states tour in Europe, and we had a lot of fun doing that.
Is there anything else then that you'd like to say before we wind this up?
Well, yes, I would very much like to thank the Nashville Bar Association for inviting me to give my oral history. It's been a very meaningful process, and I appreciate that very much.
Okay, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I've thought about that, and I go back in time to an editorial that I always loved about you, and it was about you. The Nashville Tennessean had described you in their editorial endorsement of you for Chancery Court when you had to run. They described you as a good man and a good judge. And I really liked that. I thought it was very accurate and very simple. And it had sort of an elegance about it. So that's how I would like to be remembered, a good woman and a good lawyer.
Well, I think during your career you've earned that, Rose, and I, for one, vote for it.
Okay, well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate it.
Anything else that we need to say before we wind this up?
I think that's a wrap.